It's funny how much weight a single word can hold, family. It's supposed to mean love, loyalty, support. But when you're on the receiving end of one too many selfish acts, that word starts to feel more like a chain than a comfort. And I learned that the hard way. I'm 30 years old, working full-time at a small marketing agency, trying to keep my head above water financially. Some days, it feels like the only thing I'm good at is managing stress. I'm juggling deadlines, an underpaid position, and trying to maintain a semblance of social life, which, to be honest, feels like a luxury at this point. I have a small, cozy apartment, one of the few perks of my hard work, and I cherish the quiet moments at home, my little sanctuary away from the chaos. Then there's my sister, Grace. She's 32, and we've always had a rocky relationship, to say the least. Growing up, she was the type who always seemed to get what she wanted, whether it was attention, gifts, or just people's time. Our parents, while not terrible, were often too caught up in their own lives to realize what was happening. I was the quieter, more reserved one, always there to pick up the pieces when things fell apart. I guess you could say I became the responsible one by default. Grace never had that same sense of responsibility. While I was working part-time jobs to save up for college, Grace was out having fun, living in the moment, and letting everything else fall to the side. Our parents never really held her accountable, so she got used to people picking up her slack, whether that meant me or anyone else who happened to be in her orbit. She never learned how to manage her life, and I guess I started to feel resentful of it, even though I didn't quite know how to express it at the time. Fast forward to adulthood, I've managed to build a life, but it's not without its hurdles. Meanwhile, Grace, well, she's still floating. She's never been able to keep a stable job, bouncing between retail positions, and she's always asking for help whenever she's a little short on rent or needs a place to crash between apartments. It's the same story every time, and after years of it, I've learned to brace myself whenever she calls. But what I didn't expect was how much things would change after I moved into my own apartment. I thought it would be different, you know? I thought that because I was finally doing okay, she might start to treat me like an equal. Maybe she'd see me as someone who had my life together and could offer something beyond just helping her out. I was wrong. So incredibly wrong. I remember the first time I really started feeling like I was just a backup plan for Grace. I had invited her to my place for dinner, hoping for a moment of connection, just the two of us. I cooked a nice meal, set the table, and was genuinely looking forward to it. But as usual, Grace showed up late, fashionably late, of course, and when she walked in, it was obvious she'd had a few drinks already. Not that I minded at first. I thought maybe she'd loosen up and we could have a real conversation. But instead, she barely acknowledged the meal I'd prepared. She just grabbed a bottle of wine, opened it, and started talking about her latest adventure, which, surprise, was another failed job attempt. I didn't get it. I was trying so hard to be the supportive older sister, but every time I extended a hand, it felt like she was pulling away. It's like she didn't even care about what I was going through, my stress, my struggles. It was always about her. And then came the moment that finally snapped something in me. I had a job interview for a position I really wanted, one that could have changed my life. And I was terrified. Grace knew it was important to me. But when I told her about it, she just shrugged and started talking about how she didn't know what to do with her life. She never asked about my interview, never offered any support. It was as if my dreams were secondary to whatever crisis she was going through. And as the weeks went by, it became clear that the dynamic wasn't just one of sisterly care, it was one of entitlement. Grace didn't just expect help, she demanded it, and when I didn't give it, there was this unspoken resentment, and it started to eat at me. The final straw came when she asked me for money, not for the first time, but this time was different. She had fallen behind on rent again, and it was like clockwork. She sent me a message outlining her usual sob story. "Hey, I'm a little short this month. Can you lend me a few hundred? I promise I'll pay you back." But this time, I didn't respond immediately. I thought about it. and I remembered every time I'd been there for her, every time I'd picked up the pieces of her mistakes, and every time I'd been the one to help her while she never really helped me. I started to realize that I had always been the fixer of her life, and I was tired. Tired of being the one who put everything on the line just to be used again. So I didn't send the money, I didn't respond at all, and I felt a bit of weight lift off my shoulders as I finally decided that I wasn't going to be her safety net anymore. But then came her reaction, one I wasn't prepared for. She called me every name under the sun. Selfish, cold, the worst sister ever. The insults didn't faze me as much as the fact that she was genuinely baffled by my refusal, like she thought it was my duty to take care of her. That night, she left me a voicemail in which she said, "I can't believe you're doing this to me. You're really going to let me suffer over a couple $100? How did I end up with such a heartless sister?" I was fuming, but I also knew deep down that something had shifted. It wasn't about the money, it was about the years of manipulation and entitlement that had built up to this point. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't owe her a damn thing. I think that's when I first started planning my payback. It wasn't going to be immediate, but it was going to be unforgettable. I'd like to think that, despite everything, I'm the type of person who remains calm in an emergency. I'd spent years helping people, putting out metaphorical fires, and being the responsible one. But what I never anticipated was that the one time I truly needed help, it wouldn't come from the person who should have been there for me most, my sister. It started like any other evening. I'd just finished a long day at work, sitting down to a quick dinner, when I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my stomach. At first, I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was indigestion, maybe just a bad meal. But within a few minutes, it became clear that this was something more serious. The pain intensified, and I felt dizzy, nauseous. My vision started to blur. I knew something wasn't right. I grabbed my phone and called my sister, hoping for some support. Grace was supposed to be the one I could count on, right? She was always telling me how family came first. I didn't want to panic, but I needed her. I needed her to drive me to the emergency room. I couldn't drive in the state I was in. When she picked up the phone, I could tell from the sound of her voice that she was distracted. It was like I had interrupted something. "Hey, what's up?" she asked, her tone light, almost detached. "Grace, I need help. I'm in a lot of pain, and I don't think I can drive. Could you please take me to the ER? I don't know what's going on, but it feels bad." There was a brief silence on the other end. I could hear her shuffle around, maybe adjusting herself on the couch. "What? Why don't you just call an Uber or something? I'm busy." I could feel the blood drain from my face. "What do you mean you're busy? This is serious, Grace. I need you." She sighed audibly. "Not my problem, okay? I've got plans tonight, and I'm not about to drop everything to drive you to the hospital. You can figure it out." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I felt this lump form in my throat, my heart pounding in my chest. I opened my mouth to say something, but nothing came out. How could she say that to me? Not my problem? This wasn't just about a ride. It was about someone I had always been there for, someone I had supported, someone I had loved unconditionally. And in my moment of need, she was telling me to figure it out. I tried to steady myself, forcing back tears. "You're really going to leave me like this? You're my sister. Please, just drive me." But she cut me off, her voice colder now. "Look, I don't know what's going on with you, but I'm not getting involved. Call someone else. Bye." And just like that, she hung up on me. I stared at my phone, unable to process what had just happened. My sister, my family, had just abandoned me. In a moment where I needed her the most, she refused to help. I felt the wave of hurt and betrayal crash over me, but there was no time to dwell on it. I had to get to the hospital. Somehow, I managed to summon the strength to call an Uber. I can't remember much of the ride. The pain had become unbearable, and I was trying to keep it together. But all I could think about was Grace. She didn't even ask if I was okay, didn't offer any kind of sympathy. In fact, she was so dismissive, like it was all just an inconvenience to her. I spent the entire ride crying quietly, Not for my physical pain, but because I realized that at that moment, I was completely alone. When I arrived at the ER, I was in a daze. They took me in right away, and I was hooked up to an IV, my mind racing with everything that had just happened. I'd expected to feel relief once I was in the care of the doctors and nurses, but it didn't come. What hurt more than the pain in my abdomen was the way Grace had treated me. She had been my safety net, and I had always believed that no matter what, family would be there. But now I realized that my sister didn't see me as family. She saw me as someone she could use when it was convenient for her, and if it wasn't, I was just another burden to her. I spent hours at the hospital undergoing tests and waiting for answers, but all I could think about was the conversation with Grace. How could she do that to me? How could she turn her back on me when I needed her most? As I lay in that sterile hospital bed, exhausted and drained, I made a decision. I would never let her take advantage of me again. The betrayal ran deep, deeper than anything she had done before. And in the back of my mind, I was already planning my payback, something that would remind Grace that I was no longer someone she could walk all over. The pain in my body was nothing compared to the ache in my heart, but I knew this moment would change everything. The days after my ER visit were a blur of physical recovery, but emotionally, I was stewing. Every time I thought about what had happened, Grace's dismissal, her refusal to help, it felt like a fresh wound, reopening. I didn't just feel hurt, I felt used. Like I was this constant backup plan for her to lean on whenever it suited her. But when it came time for me to lean on her, she was nowhere to be found. I didn't want to let it slide. I wasn't going to just forgive and forget like I always had in the past. I was done playing the good sister role. But as the days passed, my anger began to simmer beneath the surface, and I found myself looking for an opportunity to settle the score nothing big, just enough to make Grace feel what it was like to be ignored, dismissed, and ultimately let down by family. I wasn't sure how I would do it, but I knew I would. It didn't take long for Grace to come calling, as she always did when she was in need. Just a week after I'd been discharged from the hospital, I got a text from her. It read, "Hey, I'm in a tight spot this month. I'm a little short on rent. Could you lend me some money? Just a couple hundred until payday. Please?" My first instinct was to laugh bitterly. A couple hundred? After what she'd said to me when I needed help, she actually thought I would lend her anything? I stared at the message for a while, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, ready to type a response, but I didn't. I put my phone down and walked away. But it wasn't over. I kept thinking about it, and soon I realized I had to do something about it. For years, I'd been there for her. I'd given her money when she needed it, covered her rent more times than I could count, and put myself on the line to help her with her chaotic life. And what did I get in return? Nothing. Just excuses and selfishness. I didn't owe her anything, but I knew that in order for her to understand how deeply she had hurt me, I had to make it clear that she wasn't going to walk all over me anymore. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the principle. It was about me taking a stand. But when I didn't respond to her message, I knew she'd come by in person. It wasn't the first time she'd done it, showing up unannounced, assuming that I would drop whatever I was doing to help her. And that's exactly what happened. 3 days after that text, she appeared at my door, knocking loud enough to shake the frame. "Hey," she greeted me, all bright-eyed and cheerful, as if nothing had happened. "I'm really in a jam this month. You think you could help me out with the rent? I know you've got the money, and it's only a couple hundred." I stood there for a moment, staring at her. Grace looked perfectly put together, as usual, her hair freshly styled, her clothes on point, acting like she didn't just leave me hanging in an emergency last week. I took a deep breath, keeping my face neutral. "I'm not giving you any money," I said flatly. Her expression faltered for a split second, and I could see the surprise flash across her face. I wasn't sure what she had expected, but I guess she didn't think I'd actually say no. "What?" she asked, a little louder now. "You're really not going to help me? After everything I've done for you?" I crossed my arms. You didn't help me when I needed it. I called you last week, remember? You told me it wasn't your problem." She blinked, caught off guard. For a second, she looked guilty, but then that quickly faded into frustration. "That was different, okay? You were just being dramatic. I didn't know it was that serious, but I'm in a tight spot right now. You can't just leave me hanging." I clenched my fists at my sides, trying to keep calm, but it was getting harder. Every word she said made me feel angrier, like she was twisting everything around to make me feel bad for not helping her. "You've always been in a tight spot, Grace, and every time you come to me for money, you expect me to just hand it over, but when I needed help, when I was in a real emergency, you refused. You told me to figure it out. Well, guess what? I've figured it out, and I'm not giving you any money this time." Her face turned red with anger. "So now you're just going to punish me? Fine, be like that, but I'm not going to forget this." I stood my ground. "I don't expect you to forget it. I just want you to realize that you can't keep using people, Grace. I'm not your backup anymore." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of something that resembled fear in her expression. She took a step back, realizing that I wasn't budging. She wasn't getting what she wanted from me anymore. "Whatever," she said, her voice laced with venom. "I'll figure it out myself. Don't come crawling to me when you need anything." "I won't," I replied, shutting the door in her face. I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would, though. I felt a strange sense of calm, like I'd finally drawn a line in the sand that couldn't be crossed. The relationship with my sister had been toxic for far too long, and now I was done, but I didn't realize just how far Grace would go to keep herself in the center of attention. Less than an hour later, I got a call from my mom. "You're being a terrible sister," she yelled. "Grace came over here crying her eyes out. She said you wouldn't help her with her rent and that you're the worst sibling ever. What's wrong with you?" "Mom," I said, keeping my voice level, "I don't think you understand. She left me at the hospital when I needed her. She told me it wasn't her problem." "I don't care about that," she snapped. "You should help her. Family helps each other, no matter what. You're just being selfish." The words stung, but I wasn't backing down. "No, Mom, I'm not being selfish. I'm protecting myself. I've helped her too many times, and she's never been there for me. She left me hanging when I needed her. I'm done enabling her." "Well, maybe if you were more supportive, she wouldn't be in these situations." My mom's voice wavered, like she was trying to convince herself more than me. "You need to apologize, or you'll lose her for good." But it was already too late for apologies. Grace had made her choice, and I'd made mine. As much as it hurt to hear my mom take her side, I knew I wasn't wrong. I was done playing the martyr, done being the person everyone relied on. For once, I was going to stand up for myself. No more bending over backward for people who couldn't even bother to show up when it mattered. The reality of what I had done began to settle in. Grace wasn't going to let this go without a fight, but I wasn't scared. I had a plan now, a way to make sure she never used me again. It was time to make her see what it felt like to be on the other side. Things escalated quickly after my conversation with my mom. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, as Grace's manipulation grew bolder. Word had spread through the family about our argument, and while I was steady in my resolve, Grace was doing what she did best. Playing the victim, she painted me as the villain to anyone who would listen, twisting the story in her favor. She was relentless. A few days after our confrontation, I found myself sitting at home, just trying to get through another week. But the ringing of my phone interrupted my peace. It was an unknown number, and for a second, I thought maybe it was the hospital calling about a follow-up from my ER visit. But when I picked up, it was someone I hadn't expected. My cousin, Sarah. "Hey, I'm sorry to bother you, but I heard about what happened with Grace. Are you really not going to help her out with her rent?" Her voice was tentative, as if she was tiptoeing around something. I could almost hear Grace in the background, whispering, nudging Sarah to intervene. It didn't surprise me, though. I knew Grace was using her connections to try and rally support. I had been expecting this. "No," I said, calm and collected. I'm not, and I don't appreciate being dragged into this. There was a long pause on the line before Sarah spoke again. But she's family, you know? It's just a couple $100. I think you should really reconsider. You don't understand, Sarah. This isn't about the money, I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. Grace has never been there for me, ever. When I needed her, she left me stranded. She didn't even care when I was in the ER. She's using everyone, and I'm done. I let the silence hang in the air, hoping Sarah would finally understand. But then, the next words out of her mouth sent a sharp pang of annoyance through me. I get that you're upset, but that's your sister. You're making a big mistake here. If you don't help her, you're going to regret it. Regret it? I had already regretted it for years. Regretted every time I had given in, every time I had been the one to carry the weight of the relationship. No, I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. Let me tell you something, Sarah, I said, my voice steady but firm. I've been helping Grace for years, and every time it's the same thing. I'm the one who's there for her, and she doesn't even care. Not once has she been there for me when I needed it most. This time, I'm saying no, and I'm not changing my mind. Before she could reply, I hung up, but just as I thought I'd caught a break, my phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Grace herself. You're really going to let me drown like this? I thought you were my sister. I guess I was wrong about you. Everyone's going to know what kind of person you really are. It was almost laughable. She thought I was the one in the wrong. She thought I was the selfish one. I didn't respond. The words felt hollow now, a useless attempt to manipulate me into feeling guilty. But something in me snapped, and I realized that I couldn't let this go on. I had to put an end to it, not just with her, but with the entire family dynamic that had allowed her to get away with this kind of behavior. That evening, I got an idea. A plan that would put everything out in the open once and for all. A plan that would make everyone see exactly who Grace really was. The next morning, I made a phone call to my mom. I could feel the nerves building, but I knew it had to be done. She answered on the second ring. Hi, Mom. I need to talk to you about Grace. What now? She asked, her tone already defensive. Listen, I've had enough of her playing the victim. I'm done with the manipulation. I'm not going to be painted as the villain when I'm the one who's always had her back. But I'm tired of being the one who sacrifices for her and gets nothing in return. It's time everyone knows the truth about what happened last week. There was a pause before she sighed. What do you mean, the truth? I'm talking about Grace's behavior when I was in the hospital. She refused to help me. She told me it wasn't her problem. But now she's acting like I'm the one who's heartless for not giving her money. I could hear her trying to interrupt, but I wasn't finished. You didn't know the whole story, Mom. She wasn't there when I needed her. She didn't care, and now she's using the family to turn everyone against me. If you want to know the kind of person she is, it's time you hear it from me, not from her. The silence on the other end was thick. I could hear my mom swallowing, the weight of my words settling in. Finally, she spoke. What are you saying? I'm saying I've been the one to always give, but not anymore. This time, I'm putting my foot down. And if you want to know what's really going on, I'll be happy to tell you. But don't let her make me out to be the bad guy when she's the one who's been selfish all along. With that, I hung up. The next few hours were a whirlwind. I gathered evidence screenshots of Grace's refusal to help when I was in the ER. The text messages where she demanded money after abandoning me, even the phone call recordings where she tried to make me feel guilty. I wasn't going to let her twist this any longer. Then I sent it. I sent the screenshots and recordings to every single member of our family, to my mom, my aunt, my cousins, everyone who had been swayed by Grace's lies. I made sure they knew exactly what had happened. I wasn't hiding anymore. It wasn't about revenge. It was about getting my dignity back, about making sure that Grace couldn't manipulate everyone into believing that she was the victim. By the time I heard back, I was calm. The messages started flooding in responses from the family, all of them realizing what had happened. It was a slow burn, but it felt good. The truth had been exposed and Grace's facade was crumbling. The final message I received was from my mom. "I didn't know. I'm sorry. We'll talk more soon." But I already knew it wouldn't be the same. The dynamic had shifted, and I had finally taken control. The fallout wasn't immediate, but when it came, it hit harder than I expected. Grace tried to spin her usual narrative, but now she didn't have her usual support system to fall back on. The truth about her actions, the way she abandoned me when I needed help, how she'd manipulated everyone for so long, was out in the open. And the reactions weren't what she was used to. It started with my mom. After the initial message of apology, she called me. I could hear the weight in her voice, the realization that she had been blind to Grace's behavior for so long. It wasn't easy for her to admit that she'd been so caught up in Grace's excuses, but she did. We talked for over an hour, sorting through everything that had been buried under the years of Grace's lies. "I had no idea, honey," my mom said, her voice soft with regret. "I'm so sorry for not seeing it sooner. You've always been the one to give, and I didn't realize how much she was taking from you." I could tell she was genuinely sorry. I appreciated the apology, but I wasn't looking for sympathy. I was looking for change. I told her that it wasn't just about what Grace had done to me, it was about my own boundaries, about learning to put myself first. I wasn't going to let Grace continue to tear at the fabric of our family and my peace of mind. I needed my mom to understand that. The hardest part came when I finally faced Grace. A few days after I'd sent the family the truth about what happened, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. I wasn't expecting it, but I wasn't exactly surprised either. She knocked on my door, her face pale, eyes red from crying. She tried to force her way in, but I held my ground. "Let me in," she demanded, her voice shaking with anger. "You can't just do this to me. You can't turn everyone against me. You think I don't know what you've been doing? I'm your sister. You don't get to walk in here and act like everything's fine, Grace," I said, my voice steady. I crossed my arms, making it clear that I wasn't backing down. "I didn't turn anyone against you. You did that all on your own. You're the one who pushed everyone away, including me. And now you have to deal with the consequences." She stared at me, disbelief written all over her face. "You really don't get it, do you? I've been struggling and you decide to kick me while I'm down. I need help. You're my sister. You should be the one who stands by me, not betray me." The words stung, but I wasn't going to let her manipulate me again. "I have stood by you, Grace, for years, but I can't do it anymore. I've been nothing but a crutch for you, and you've never once considered what I need, what I feel. You take, and when I need something, anything, you walk away. You left me stranded when I was in the hospital. You turned your back on me, and now you want me to fix things for you? Not this time." Her face twisted with anger, but I stood firm. "You've lost your chance," I added. "I'm done being your fallback. I'm not your safety net anymore. You can't just expect me to clean up your messes, and you can't keep running to me for help when you can't even be bothered to show up when it counts." For a moment there was silence. I thought maybe, just maybe, she was starting to understand. But Grace wasn't the type to accept responsibility easily. She wasn't done yet. "I never needed you," she spat, her voice venomous. "You're nothing. You always act like you're the better sister, but you're just as selfish as everyone else. I don't need your help. I don't need anyone." Her words were harsh, but I didn't flinch. I could feel the weight of the moment, the finality in the air. This was it. There was no turning back. I stepped back, finally opening the door just enough to say the words that had been building inside me for so long. "Goodbye, Grace. I hope you figure things out, but I'm not part of your game anymore." She didn't say anything else. She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding. I didn't feel relief right away. I felt this strange, heavy sense of finality, like something had snapped, and I was never going to be the same again. In the days that followed, things shifted. My relationship with my mom began to heal, though it would take time. She reached out more often, genuinely trying to understand my boundaries and giving me space when I needed it. My extended family? They started to see the truth too. Slowly but surely, the narrative Grace had spun around me unraveled. No one was calling me selfish anymore, and the pity that had surrounded Grace started to fade. People were beginning to realize who had really been the problem all along. Grace was left to pick up the pieces on her own. I wasn't part of that anymore. I didn't care what happened to her. If she couldn't face the consequences of her actions, that was her burden to bear. For the first time in years, I felt free. I was no longer tethered to the chaos, no longer carrying the weight of her mistakes. I had put myself first, and it felt like a victory, a small one, but a victory nonetheless. I learned something from this. You can love someone, but that doesn't mean you have to accept their abuse. You can still be family without letting them walk all over you. Grace may be my sister by blood, but that didn't mean she was entitled to everything I had to give. I wasn't the villain in this story. I was the one who finally stopped enabling the cycle of manipulation, and in the end, I was the one who walked away with my peace.